All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to some of you out there. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know we got a small group today. I know we always get a small group and we have to move the calls, so sorry for any inconvenience from last week. I know we try to hold this on the first Thursday each month. We're having some problems with our internet here in Washington, D.C. last week, but all fixed up now. So we'll go through the typical agenda, go through the typical slides. If you guys have questions, as always, feel free to interrupt me, ask questions. You can ask questions in the chat. You can introduce yourselves in the chat as well. We are recording this, so we'll be able to post this for folks who weren't able to join us today can still come back and review it if they would like to. And all of you can see the slides and review it again as well. But we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to go pretty quickly through the first, the legislative bits. There's not a lot of updates on some of our legislative work here or the legislative work in Congress. But I know there's a lot of updates on some of the administrative programs, agency rules, deadlines, things like that for some of the Treasury and some of the HUD programs. So we'll kind of go through pretty quickly on the legislative side. You can see the agenda here. It's kind of the standard agenda we have. We always kind of start off with the housing bills. So that's, NAIHC, that's funding bills and the like. And then we kind of go into the grant or agency work. So agency programs, grant work, all that. So like I said, we'll go through pretty quickly on the legislative updates because there's not a whole lot to talk about since we last chatted just a few weeks ago in Seattle. So hopefully some of you on the call today were able to join us in Seattle. Had a great conference up there, our annual convention, first annual convention in 3 years. So very excited that we were able to pull that off and had a lot of good conversations and networking there, of course, at our event. So we'll go jump into some of the updates here. Just real briefly, as you've all known and seen, NAIHC reauthorization bill, that's probably our primary bill each Congress. And until it's authorized, this will be one of our primary priorities in getting a bill passed, getting Congress to pay attention to this bill and this reauthorization to get it done. We'd all like to see the certainty of having NAIHC reauthorized. It was last passed in 2008, expired in 2013, so we're almost up on a decade now of our primary tribal housing program being unauthorized by Congress. So here's the main bill that we've been working on and working with our folks on the Hill about. S-2264. This is the primary NAIHC reauthorization bill. It's been around for a couple of years now, a couple of Congresses, and it hasn't changed a whole lot. We try to get updates in as we can. You can see some of the key provisions there. The biggest change is that it's a 10-year authorization. So we wouldn't have to go through this cycle as often, or this uncertainty as often once things expire. You'd like to see Congress reauthorize them very quickly. Here, because we know everything takes longer these days in Congress, we're okay with them putting in a 10-year reauthorization to shore up that certainty. Obviously, we'd like to always keep up adding updates to NAIHC programs, whether it's at HUD or whether it's incorporating other programs that can work with NAIHC. But we can always try to address those, as standalones as well outside of the NAIHC reauthorization process. But here's the primary bill that we've been working on. And this bill has passed the Senate once, so we still have some optimism for this year, getting it across the finish line. But it'll take a lot of work through the summer and fall and probably the lame duck session as well at the end of the year. So we won't highlight some of these that we've talked about this kind of each month. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask or type something in the chat. But we can go through it in more detail if you'd like. But we'll go through these pretty quick. The next slide, I believe, just updates kind of where that is. It was reported out of committee back in February. The next step, increase the sponsor count, work with the committee staff to find other bills, other moving vehicles that this bill can get attached to, and then pass the Senate, pass the House likewise. One of the targets there, like, as we always talk about, is the NDAA bill, which passes Congress each year. That's the National Defense Authorization Act. The House version also has some good provisions in it. You can see them on the screen there, but it's got a couple of provisions that we were not supportive of, particularly on the authorization front. The funding levels in that bill start out very low, lower than what tribes have been receiving in these past couple of years of appropriation. So House version here just has the one sponsor, Chairwoman Maxine Waters. Another NAIHC bill that we've talked about in the past is kind of the national policy kind of dream bill, particularly from the Democratic side of Congress, American Housing and Mobility Act. So it would reauthorize NAIHC as well and actually step up funding for NAIHC programs quite a bit, but are very unlikely to pass in its current form. Other tribal housing bills, we've talked about these, HUD-VASH, it's always part of the larger NAIHC efforts. Native American Rural Home Ownership Improvement Act, number of co-sponsors, always some movement on this. Again, another shout out to the South Dakota Homeownership Coalition, who's been pushing this bill quite a bit, working with the sponsors of this bill, making sure folks are aware of the pilot that this is based on, how it's been working, how it's been successful. And this bill would expand this USDA program 502 loan relending project, which would allow the native CDFIs across the country to access some USDA 502 home loan program funds directly, rather than having to have prospective native home buyers go to USDA. They'd be able to work kind of more locally with their native CDFI, and it just generates a lot more home loans in tribal communities than what we've seen with the USDA acting alone. So always hopeful for this bill. This is the first Congress that this bill has been here. The set aside portion has been around for a few years now, but this is kind of the latest and greatest effort to get a very specific pot of money over to tribes and to prospective tribal home buyers. So it's a great effort. It's based on a great pilot that's been going on in South Dakota the last couple of years. Pilot's been so successful that the administration actually put that into their FY23 budget to add more funds to that pilot and keep that going, pending a larger bill being authorizing the program at a larger scale like this bill would. So some good progress there that we'll continue talking about over the summer months. Tribal Trust Land Home Ownership Act, S3381. This bill would just provide some updates to the BIA trust land mortgage process. They have to provide a lot of documents to lenders and homeowners, often very slow at that. This bill would put timelines and deadlines in statute, which is currently it's just kind of in a guidebook or handbook for the BIA. This would put it with the force of law. Some progress there was passed out of committee just last month during our conference, actually, while we were in Seattle. Senate Committee for Indian Affairs reported this bill out of committee that same week. Real quick, just going through the appropriations. I think we're all familiar and seeing this. It's been a couple of months now that these have come out. Full year appropriations came out in March. A good step up for tribal housing programs based on prior years. Still not getting us anywhere where we would like to be for annual funding for Indian Housing Block Grant, for NAIHC programs. And then kind of the other metric that we use to measure tribal housing funds is how big a share is tribal housing dollars compared to the overall investment in public housing, and we use the overall investment in all of HUD to measure against. And tribal share has actually been shrinking over the last 20 years. So while the dollars have been kind of flatlined for 20 years and kind of shrinking with regard to inflation, it's also been shrinking as a part of the overall HUD budget and appropriation. So a couple of metrics there. So while it's a gain in some respects, and it's a very welcome gain for a lot of tribes and tribal programs, still not getting us where tribes should be, kind of on a parity level with other housing programs, or just keeping tribes where they were when we all struck this bargain of NAIHC back in the 90s. So a lot of work still to be done, but it's great to see some of these increases. Hopefully that's good momentum moving forward to continue growing these programs as they need to be. Didn't see that in the FY23 budget, which I'll pull up here on the next slide. It does keep all the gains that were made in the FY22 full year appropriations. Doesn't really add on to that yet. Usually we do see something like that when you make a good jump. There's usually a year or two before budgets start to ask for more, but we'll continue to work with our stakeholders at HUD, at OMB, the White House, and then of course with our allies in Congress to continue to plus up tribal housing program dollars and resources to our tribal housing program. But you can see, for the first time in a while, the budgets coming out of the White House and the administration asking for at least $1 billion for tribal housing programs. And we haven't seen that before the last year or two. So certainly some progress, and we'll try to keep capturing that momentum and continue tribal programs moving even higher with resources that they get through Congress and appropriations. The very last point there on the slide is the USDA 502 pilot program. Budget included $27 million or so for that program to continue putting out loans directly to Native homeowners or prospective homeowners through that program, through Native CDFIs and the USDA program. Appropriations hearings and markups are largely happening this month. I think we just saw the schedule come out for a lot of the Senate appropriation hearings and markups for these bills. So we'll be monitoring those and seeing how tribal housing programs fare and a lot of those appropriations bills. So I'll stop right there real quick and open it up for quick questions. The next few slides do talk about some of the agency programs, HUD grants, Treasury grants. I know there's been a lot of question and a lot of discussion on those the last couple of weeks, but I'll stop here, open up to the group here if there's any questions on legislative issues, funding issues, NAIHC type questions and the like. Any questions out there so far? We'll keep jumping ahead. And like I said, you can always interrupt. You can always type something in the chat there as well. For the HUD grants, we'll go into that. So largely this slide focuses on FY21. So this is the fiscal year that's passed, but a lot of the funding has been coming out, during FY21 and up to now. Most of these grants have actually kind of run their course, or they've been awarded out. A lot of the work's still going to be carried out in the future, but a lot of these grant cycles have been awarded out. FY21 ICDBG ARP. This was the $280 million pot of money that was included in the American Rescue Plan for the Community Development Block Grant. These were treated more like imminent threat type grants. So it's kind of a rolling basis that these were approved. All of that's been awarded out. $280 million were awarded to tribes under those grants. I'll come back to that one in a second, but we'll go to the other FY21 grants. The Indian Community Development Block Grant annual appropriation, 70 million or so. For FY22, I think it'll jump up to 75. But for FY21, there was $70 million available through the ICDBG program. HUD announced 52 million in awards to 59 tribes on May 26th, so just a couple of weeks ago. We kind of quickly asked them, why wasn't all of the funding awarded out? And the response that we got were that they did fund all kind of eligible or fundable applications. So if you had submitted an ICDBG application for the FY21 NOFA and NOFO, and it was, met all the criteria, it would have been funded. So it kind of shows that there wasn't a lot of demand for this cycle. I think that's really easy to understand, right? Over the past couple of years, tribes have, been jumping through hoops for all these different pots of funding through the COVID packages, through CARES, through ARP. And we can see that the demand for the annual ICDBG program wasn't as high. So this is kind of the first year in a long time that I think we've seen one of our tribal grants not, be oversubscribed. So that's something that, I'll be talking with folks on the Hill about and trying to make sure that they're aware of why that happened, why that was. We know there's a lot of resources out there that you all have been working with, bandwidth on, how do you apply to all, 5, 10, 15 different grant programs that are out there over these past couple of years. I'm sure some grants just kind of were less prioritized. So that's why we saw for FY21 ICDBG, only 52 million out of 70 was awarded out. So have some work there. Talking to HUD, that money just rolls in to the next cycle as well, I believe. Someone can correct me on that if I'm wrong, but I think that's what I heard. It does get rolled into another tribal program or the next NOFA cycle for that program. But I'll try to confirm that as well by the next call that we've got. FY21 IHBG competitive. This was announced the exact same day. This is 95 million or 100 million annual appropriation for IHBG. 95 million of that was awarded out to 24 tribes. So I think that was pretty much all of the funds. I think there's a couple other uses of the full 100 that gets it up to the full 100. So I don't think there's really any lack of demand for that program. But we did see those awards come out. I know we were waiting a long time for both the ICDBG and the IHBG competitive awards to be announced, but those are both out. And we're happy to see, all the tribes that are, getting projects funded and being able to construct new homes, new infrastructure, whatever it is you guys are needing in your communities, and having some resources available to do that. FY22 cycles should be coming up soon. Not sure exactly. I don't think HUD's really announced kind of a time frame for when the FY22 cycles will begin. But hopefully it's sooner in the year. I know each year there's this tension about when the awards come out. I think for some of our programs, getting award announcements at the end of May probably does miss a construction cycle, particularly for folks up in Alaska, I know, and probably some of the other northern tribes that are affected by weather in the winter months and not able to do a lot of construction. So a lot of issues there, a lot of questions there about the timing of the next grants, but hopefully we'll see that kind of in a quicker time frame coming out of HUD. The other couple programs I just listed on the slide here are other programs that are still open or available. Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, those grant applications are due June 28th, so at the end of this month. There has been some talk about trying to do some prioritization or not necessarily a full set aside, but targeting rural communities and tribes are eligible as well under this HUD grant program as well. HUD-VASH, Tribal HUD-VASH is another one that closed back in January. We heard there wasn't a lot of applications for that. So I think we're going to hear some announcements from HUD over the next month or two about either reissuing that or doing some surveys or conversations with tribes on how to expand that HUD-VASH program administratively moving forward, if that's the direction that needs to go. So the next slide here, I said we'd come back to the FY21 ICDBG ARP funding, and we'll do that here. So under the American Rescue Plan, there was a pot of money for just ICDBG awards, the 280 million I mentioned, and that was oversubscribed. So there was 45 million more in unfunded applications. So not everyone who submitted an application to that program was funded or got funding for their applications. So there's a need there. Under the same act, the American Rescue Plan, $450 million was added to the Indian Housing Block Grant. So this is the primary program, right, that all of you out there operate under. You got the supplemental funding through the American Rescue Plan, but not every tribe accepted the funds. And to accept the funds, you really just had to submit an abbreviated Indian Housing Plan on top of your typical annual Indian Housing Plan to access some of those funds. As you can see from there was a letter that went out, or a notice published in the Federal Register. I think the Dear Tribal Leader letter went out as well. As of May 6th, so last month, about 30 million of the IHBG funds had not been accepted or claimed by the tribes. This was all by formula. So a handful of the tribal programs had not, submitted the paperwork to accept those supplemental funds. Under the law, under the American Rescue Plan statute, any of those funds that aren't used or claimed, HUD actually has the ability to roll those back into the Indian Community Development Block Grant, ARP fund. So if there's about 30 million or so that has been unclaimed by tribe, which hopefully goes down because a lot of tribes who are made aware of this don't want to miss out on their own funding that's kind of allocated to them. Hopefully they do submit the paperwork to claim those funds, and that deadline is July 5th. But after that deadline, any remaining funds under IHBG ARP, HUD can use to start funding some of the unfunded applications under the ICDBG program. So just something to be aware of. If you haven't claimed your IHBG ARP funds, you can still do that. You've got a few weeks here. You can reach out to us, let us know if you need help or training or TA requests about that. I know you can always reach out to your HUD regional office as well, but really we all just want to make sure that tribes are aware of the funds that are available to them and how to access those as well. And if the tribe, still makes that proactive choice to not accept those funds for whatever reason, certainly it'll help other tribes possibly through their ICBG applications that weren't awarded. So really just want to make folks aware of that. I know there's been a few communications that went out, Dear Tribal Leader letters, and we talked about it both in Seattle, and I think a little bit on the last call, but I want to make sure people are aware of that before we can keep going through the summer. So I'll stop there. Are there any questions about some of the HUD grants that we've seen? I see one in the chat. I'll try to catch up on that, but are there any other questions out there? So one of the questions in the chat is talking about applications for imminent threats funded, I guess applications for imminent threat under ICDBG. My understanding is that talking with HUD folks, if you applied for an ICDBG ARP grant, it doesn't necessarily roll into an annual, the annual appropriation, which has kind of its own set aside and rules for the imminent threat program. So if you did have an unfunded application, I think you can probably still submit that type of imminent threat application to the normal annual funding for ICDBG. So I don't think that those are really transferable. We talked just a second ago about how any kind of unfunded ICDBG ARP or American Rescue Plan applications can still be funded by other ARP funds. I don't think the ARP and annual ICDBG is quite so transferable. So Certainly work with your regional office, HUD, ONAP regional office on those types of questions. Like I said, if I get a better understanding, I'll certainly try to make that more clear. If there's anyone on the call here today asking about that, feel free to chime in. I see Denise, you put your chat there, just talking about annual ICBG. I think for the annual ICDBG pot of funds, there's kind of a discrete set aside for the IT for the imminent threat. I don't know if they're necessarily anything. They'll fund all imminent threats for the rest of the year with the remaining annual ICBG amount. But I'll try to clarify that with HUD folks. But that, like I said before, that money is not going away. It does get rolled into another tribal grant as well, but it may not be as simple as just using that remaining balance for IT applications. I know they have a kind of a set aside each year under the annual ICDBG program, but we'll try to get an answer for that one. Definitely a good question there. Anything else on the HUD grants? I see a question in the chat about treasury. We'll get to that here in a second. Yeah. See the question in the chat. Can you clarify what happened to the unfunded money? Will get allocated out to those that did accept the ARP funds. So again, if there was unclaimed IHBG ARP money, and from the Deer Tribal Leader, we've seen about 30 million or so that were allocated to tribes through the formula have not been claimed. That doesn't necessarily go to other tribes. That'll go into the ICDBG ARP pool, which had some unfunded applications. So you would have had to have submitted an ICDBG ARP application, and then those applications that are still remaining may get a benefit from any unclaimed IHBG funds. Hopefully that helps clear that up. That's where that money will roll into. So IHBG ARP money will roll into ICDBG ARP pool, which has remaining applications needing to be funded. So hopefully that clears that up. I think there's just another slide or two for HUD. Tribal Intergovernmental Advisory Council. This deadline was the end of May. I think we got a confirmation from HUD kind of anecdotally that they did get a number of nominees that they're going to be able to move forward with this. They're trying to make sure that they establish this committee council, by the end of the fiscal year. So by the end of September 30th, and then really get that council propped up and working and having its regular meetings moving forward. So they did get some nominations. I think I'm not sure their cycle. They are 2-year terms, so there'll be another chance to do nominations. If you feel like your region's not going to get represented, I didn't get a breakdown of how many nominations per region, but I think we'll be able to see that as they do more announcements on the Tribal Intergovernmental Advisory Council. If there are gaps, there will be chances in the future to submit more nominations for the council, at least on the annual cycle of nominees being kind of renominated and reappointed to the council. They all serve 2-year terms, so in 2 years at least there will be another cycle for nominees for the Intergovernmental Advisory Council. So this is kind of the first time we've had this level of formality talking with HUD leadership outside of the ONAP structure as well. So here we're going to jump into the treasury programs. I know there was a couple questions in the chat there, and we'll get to that. Just trying to do the little overview here first. So Emergency Rental Assistance Program. This is the funds that tribes got kind of at the very beginning of, I believe, 2021 now. Had kind of all of 2021 to try to set up their programs. I know there was a lot of delays, making sure that HUD was putting out the best guidance and that tribes weren't going to start setting up programs until the Treasury guidance was set and more formed. So the tribes have had all 2021, the first couple quarters of 2022 to spend that money. All the money for ERA, Emergency Rental Assistance Program, under the law, under the statute that created it, has to be spent by September 30th, 2022, which is coming up in just a few months. And there's one exception, which we'll get to here in a second. And then, so part of that program, as you're all aware, tribal reallocation. So under the ERA program, under the statute or the law that created ERA, there are reallocations. And this is both true for the tribal program and for the main state program. A lot of states have already been reallocating money between states, localities, and even giving some of those funds over to tribes as well. I know a lot of tribes have already received reallocations moving from that program. Moving forward, tribes have not had any money pulled away from them or reallocated away from their programs, but that will happen in this next quarter coming up. So the final quarter of FY22, which is July, August, and September. And what the basis for those reallocations will be is the July 15th reporting deadline coming up next month. So, and as I said, tribes have already been receiving reallocations from non-tribal programs. And you can see at the bottom of the screen, kind of the reporting data. There's a big lag from Treasury, what they're reporting out for tribal programs, because states are monthly reporting requirements, tribes only have quarterly, but even then there's this lag, and I've only seen the December data, unless it's popped up in the last day or two from Treasury. I haven't seen any announcements of more recent tribal data. But you can see, at the end of 2021, December 2021, tribes have only spent about a third of the ERA funds. So we knew there's a lot of work there going in to this year. And we've had about 5 or 5.5 months now of seeing tribes spend ERA funds. So there's a lot of questions about what tribes will be doing with their funds as we approach the September 30th deadline. I'll jump to the next slide. There was a webinar that we actually hosted from NAIHC's perspective. Treasury reached out to us and wanted to set this up. We had a webinar last week on June 1, just to outline the timeframes and procedures related to reallocation, related to final reporting. That webinar is posted on our YouTube page. So if you go to YouTube, type in NAIHC, you'll see some of our videos that we've posted, different trainings and the like, and particularly this one webinar will be there. The webinar was a full hour. There was a question and answer session, and you can see some of the questions there that I captured that were kind of the most asked. We did edit that out of the webinar video. It's online. Talking with Treasury, they provided some answers to that, but they wanted to get more formal answers. They didn't want to confuse anyone with trying to rely on the answers they were giving live during the video. So we really only posted the portion of the webinar that was kind of the walking through the timeframes and procedures that they had already released through documentation. So, but that video is there to at least get an overview of the next couple of months of the ERA program. You can see some of the biggest questions that we heard during that webinar. The biggest question I think was, can tribes pay prospective rent utilities for October, November, December of this year? So in talking through the program, Treasury says there's 90 days kind of grace period, right? So after September 30th deadline, you've got 90 days to close out your grants, spend, final expenses, things like that. Unfortunately, and I'll jump to the next slide. I think hopefully a lot of you saw a letter come out yesterday. Dear Tribal Leader letter was sent out, and they kind of clarified, unfortunately, in a direction I don't think any of us would like to see, that the 90-day grace period after the September 30th is not meant for those kind of substantive expenses. So they're saying we cannot provide prospective rent or utility assistance or cover costs for other expenses related to housing. Sorry, I can't see that last line there. Housing for any period beyond September 30. So it's really only meant to cover rents, utility payments up until that September 30th deadline. I know the big question was, if someone comes in with an application for the next 3 months, which normally tribes would be able to approve 3 months prospective rent. But if they came in with that application in September for the months of October, November, December, the guidance I think Treasury is putting out is saying you can't actually use your ERA funds for those costs. So I think that's one of the bigger answers that we got from the webinar. I don't think it was a direction we wanted to see, right? I think a lot of tribes have some ERA funds. They want to make sure they're able to use this assistance as long as they can. But it was pretty clear that for that 90-day window after September 30th, it's really meant for kind of closeout expenses, things like that, administrative type expenses to close your programs down or wind them down. All that said, there is one exception. So if you're a tribe that's received reallocation, there's also this 90-day extension to spend those reallocated funds that you received. So you can, submit payments for assistance for October, November, December if you've received a reallocation. If you're using your base funding, you have to spend that by September 30th. But if you've received some additional funds, you'll have through December, I think 29th was the date, if you count out 90 days in particular. So those were kind of the questions that we got from Treasury and the answer that we got from there. I know there's some confusion out there, I think, about two deadlines. And one of the deadlines that Treasury talked about was just coming up soon, June 10th, which is tomorrow. And that deadline is for tribes to submit applications or requests to receive a reallocation from non-tribal sources. So this is kind of the similar process that's been happening the last few months, kind of on a rolling cycle. So if you're one of the tribes who have spent a lot of your ERA funds, you can request reallocations. And there's another deadline. So I think they kind of just batch those, right? So they kind of say there's a deadline. They look at everyone who submitted a request by that deadline, then they'll do some reallocations. The next one of those is this June 10th deadline. So that's tomorrow. And if you submit a request by then, you may receive some reallocated funds from non-tribal sources. The other deadline that was important, I see a hand up there, I'll get to you in a second, Sarah. The other deadline we saw was July 15th. So this is the deadline for tribes quarterly reporting. So you would report your expenses for the, April, May, and June quarter, and reporting on that is supposed to be due by July 15th. And that deadline is very important because that's the last data point that Treasury will look at when they're considering reallocations both away from your tribal program and to any reallocations to tribes. So any funds that they pull away from a tribal ERA program after July 15th, that's supposed to stay within the tribal pot. So, if tribe X, didn't spend all their ERA funds, they may have some reallocated away, and that should go to another tribe who has spent, at least 65% of the ERA funds. And then, so that should stay within kind of the tribal community universe for ERA assistance. But those are the two important deadlines. I know there's probably some confusion there, and I think it's been compounded by a lot of issues with the portal itself that Treasury is using. I know a lot of people have had issues submitting information, submitting reports. I think there's been a lot of frustration. You'll put all that data in and it won't submit, or it won't even save. So you kind of have to go back and do it all over again. The only thing I can offer now is that you have all made Treasury well aware, and I think we've echoed that from what I've heard at NAIHC, is that that's an issue moving forward. So for both of these deadlines, we don't want tribes to miss out on any reallocation based on this June 10th deadline. But more importantly, if they're having trouble with the portal now, I assume we want to make every effort to get that fixed by the July 15th deadline as well. So that's kind of my understanding of where things are. I invite anyone on the call to chime in if you've been having issues with the portal itself, if you've had other dialogue with folks at Treasury about some of these questions. Happy to jump in, but let's go to Sarah Crawford first. She's been patiently waiting there.
Thank you, Executive Director Walters. Yeah, so I had this question during the call last week regarding this whole obligation question. And so after getting and reading through the Dear Tribals email that we all received yesterday, one, it was very concerning. And this was one thing that I wanted to pose a question to NAIHC and to the members of, and Tony, you kind of mentioned it wasn't the answer we wanted to see. But my thing is well, if we want to push for what we want to see, I think we should, because it is a very gray area. And in the reallocation guidance is kind of where I was really pushing the Treasury representatives last week. There's a portion on there that says grantees must obligate all funds from their initial allocations by September 30th, 2022. And within that paragraph, it further stipulates that contractual obligations to landlords, to utilities, can go up to 12 months. And so that's what they're terming as an obligation. And so I'm really just confused on what their stance is. And I feel that this is a gray area that I think if we wanted to push Treasury on this, I think it's something that we should do now. And this kind of harkens back to the CARES Act funding, the CRF funds, where there was that big question of, is the deadline December 30th, 2020, And does that count the whole obligation aspect? And Treasury ended up deciding that obligations were fine, just as long as the obligation was met by the December 30th, 2020 deadline for that CRF. And so, I don't know if I'll be able to push it alone, but I just wanted to pose that question to others. If this is something that, your tribes are dealing with. I know the tribe that I'm representing is dealing with, and they are really trying hard to push out as much funding of that initial allocation as much as possible, meeting that June 30th deadline, and then having, it raked back. And then afterwards, we'll still have a chunk of change to deal with in the next 3 months. And we want to try to push out and do a second round. And if we're limited to that September 30th, like, we're going to lose out on a lot of funds for our tribal members that desperately need it in low income housing. So I'll kind of just turn it over to hear if anyone has any thoughts or suggestions going forward. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, and real quick, just on that same note, I'm a little in the dark as well. I mean, obviously, we're not operating any ERA programs directly ourselves at NAIHC, but when we talk about obligations and kind of contractual obligation with utility companies for a full year, a lot of the conversation from Treasury last week during the webinar was treating, October, November, December as tribe, doing prospective rent for the next 3 months, and how they think that's not allowed under the way the statute's drafted. But I'm not exactly sure, and I haven't been good. Maybe folk practitioners on the call can talk about some of those contractual obligations you've already entered into, and do any of those already extend into those 3 months based on some of just the way that those obligations and contracts have been crafted.
And so one thing for for the tribe I'm working for is, like, one of the contractual obligations is to utilities. And so the prospective rent, yes, is that there's a 3-month thing, but you can always do an additional 3 months and an additional 3 months until you get to that 12-month prospective rent if there was no arrears. Yeah. However, the whole 3-month limit is only limited to rent. It's not limited to utilities at all. And it specifically says that in the FAQs that utilities do not have to abide by that 3-month limit. And so therefore, we have already provided, written letters to tenants that say, yeah, we're going to try to, like, push it forward and go past that September 30th deadline. So now we're looking at having to rake that back. Of course, there's the issue, you can kind of bulk pay ahead of time for utilities, but then that gets kind of wonky, and it looks weird on the books as well. So we tend not to like to just bulk pay, but so that is, like, one of the big issues I was posing to Treasury was, yes, prospective rent 3 months, but utilities and internet, you can actually do up to 12-month, 15-month max if needed.
Well, that's helpful for me too, when I kind of reframe some of these questions and talk with Treasury folks again. So that'll be helpful. I'll turn it over to Thomas. You've got your hand up, our new board chair for NAIHC.
Hi, everyone. Can you see me and hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. I'm speaking from my phone right now. And so, yeah, my question is regarding the Department of Treasury, the portal. And I know that you and I talked about this, Tony, yesterday. And I was hoping that we can see if we can try to extend some deadlines to help with those technical difficulties. And you would think that since there are so many technical difficulties regarding the portal, that they would be open to extending that deadline for at least a week or so and extending both deadlines. Is that something that is doable? And if it is, what can we do to make it happen? And hello, everyone.
Yeah, so that question's been asked. I got a response this morning saying they're going to look into that. It's been this one's been a tricky one. So this June 10th deadline, as I tried to say a little bit earlier, I think this is more kind of their rolling reallocation. They've been handling reallocations in batches, right? So when in the past, if you miss, say the March deadline, if there was one, I don't remember, but if you missed a first reallocation deadline, there was always the next one to kind of rely on and submit information in the next reallocation kind of batch. Here, because it's one of the last ones that we're aware of before kind of more final reallocations under the tribal side in particular, our tribe's missing out if they don't get their request in by tomorrow. And if they are missing out and they're only missing out because of the technical issues, what's the relief there for tribes? So that question is at Treasury. That's pending. I'll continue working with them over the next day or two. But I would say, unfortunately, I mean, keep submitting stuff through the portal to the best that you can. I would say document whatever you are submitting and almost through, if it's screen grabs or I don't know, I'm not sure what the portal looks like, but whatever you can before you hit the final button that maybe wipes it all out. Try to capture that as much as you can, and then also submit that to the emails to Treasury that we've seen. We've seen I think there's a generic ERA box. There's a tribal consult email as well. So, I would try to capture all that activity. I know people are getting frustrated when they hit submit in the portal and it doesn't seem to go anywhere or it erases it out. But to the extent I would encourage you to keep doing that, and then also submit it by email if you can. And then if I get an answer from Treasury, or if we all get an answer from Treasury about the flexibility around this June 10th deadline, because it has been kind of treated as like a rolling deadline month to month almost. So we'll continue to work on that. But I know it's been frustrating for a lot of you out there trying to submit information. That's the best answer I've got right now. Like I said, I've kind of been emailing back and forth with Treasury all day yesterday and today, and trying to work on some of these questions, particularly on if the only thing is the IT issues, then I think they're going to be somewhat flexible or accommodating. I just don't know what that looks like yet. So I know they're all wanting to make sure tribal programs are as successful as they can. So we'll keep working with them over there. Yeah, Thomas. You have your hand back up again, or is that just from the first?
Oh, no. Yeah, it's from the previous one. Thank you for that response. I'm just really concerned, though, about some of these tribes, right? And these technical difficulties. And it seems like if the Department of Treasury was already experiencing these back in 2021, and then coming back to our tribal nations expecting the same kind of process in 2022, it just seems redundant to me. And it doesn't seem, it's counterintuitive. So yeah, keeping us updated would be greatly appreciated. And if we can get those pushed, that would be greatly appreciated.
So we'll continue to do that. If we get more information from Treasury, we'll be sharing that. Just a reiteration on the last deadline. So, and the portal issues, technical issues, is going to only kind of get exacerbated, right? There's a lot more tribes, this is only for voluntary submissions. The deadline tomorrow is kind of only for voluntary submissions to request reallocation. The July 15th deadline is really for all tribal ERA programs to submit their quarterly report. So that's going to be even more volume, more load on their, whatever servers or portal that they've got, whatever platform they're using, there's going to be more demand on it next month. And that month is actually more important to determine kind of tribal reallocations as a whole. So hopefully they can continue to work that out. I know they're fully aware of those issues and have been for a while. So hopefully it's something that they can work on. I know there were some other questions too, just about the reallocation itself and calculating that. I know some tribes, this quarter that we're currently in may have been there or may be their most expensive quarter. So that's why that data is important to get it in by July 15th, because if that's true, that will be your basis for how much funds you can retain and not have reallocated. So, but I know there were questions about that, particularly on the admin side, how the 10% works into that. Things like that. So I know there's some open questions there. Hopefully we see more guidance from Treasury, and we'll continue to work with them to get more information out to all of you, and we'll share that as we get it. And hopefully a lot of you are getting it directly from Treasury, but whatever we see, we'll be sending out as well. Real quick, we'll go on to the HAF program. Just quick updates here, not a whole lot right now. This says over 70 tribes have received HAF plan approval. I just got a note earlier today, it's over 100 now. So over 100 tribal programs have had their HAF plan approved. I think it was 106 or 107. But so if you're still waiting, hopefully there's at least some, optimism that things are moving along. I think that number of 30, that jump in 30 was just over the last 3 or 4 weeks. So hopefully there's some progress there to be made. Last when I chatted with Treasury back in kind of mid-May about the specific question, there were still a lot of tribes who had not even submitted their HAF plan, and they were concerned about some of those tribes. But to the extent that you have submitted it, hopefully that means you've gotten your notifications or are shortly about your HAF programs. And I believe the funding is supposed to follow fairly quickly, or it has for a lot of the tribes who have gotten their approvals. But let us know if you're still missing out on funds, or if you believe you're still haven't heard anything about your HAF plans. Happy to check in for you as well. We did host a couple of trainings. We held one back in November. I believe that is on our YouTube page as well. But we held 2 in February and March. And one of those is, I think, supposed to be loaded up to our YouTube page today. I know there was some confusion about which one of those we were using. We had some technical issues on one, but one of those trainings is available or will be available today as well from, I think it's the March 8th training that we hosted. We do have some funds available at NAIHC to help with training in TA. If you do have questions or TA needs regarding ERA or HAF, we have an online form that you can submit. I think it's a pretty quick application, just a couple pages. It's just a little bit of information. And you can find that on the link there you see on the screen, NAIHC.net/Tribal Housing Assistance Resource Hub. If you go to our webpage, I think it's on the front page even, as our front page kind of cycles around, you'll see that link come up. And then on that page, there is a form for requesting TNTA directly from us. And that's not through a federal source. That's some other funds that we've been able to secure through some of our partnerships. So hopefully it's a little bit quicker to turn around. If you do submit something, if you have submitted something and haven't heard back from us, let me know. I think there was 1 or 2 cases of that last month when we had this call, and I believe those have been fixed or those tribes have been reached out to. But if you have submitted a request to us for training in TA, for either ERAP or for HAF, and you haven't heard anything, definitely let us know, because that's something we want to be quick about. We know these are timely programs for all of you and the members of your community you're trying to serve. So let us know if you have issues there. I'm going to skip over this slide. We've been having a second monthly call. It's kind of our turnout for those calls has gone down. We may be doing a poll or something in the near future to see what topics people would like to have discussed. If you have any ideas, feel free to put them in the chat as well. And we'll try to get this type of forum up and running. And I do think it's important to have more conversation among our members. I think as we get back to in-person meetings, this will be helped by having those conversations in person. But we also want to have these kind of regular forums for folks to join and have conversations about very specific topics moving forward. So if you have ideas on topics to talk about, let us know. We'll try to find a way to get these conversations more robust and have more participation. Maybe it's just a marketing issue, I'm not sure, but we'll try to make sure people are well aware when we have these conversations moving forward. I'll finish off the slide because I think there's only 1 or 2 more, and we can kind of open it up from there. And Thomas jumped in with a question there, but I did want to congratulate him. He's our newly elected board chairperson, elected at our Seattle conference last month. Is our first call that we've had since that conference with members through the legislative committee. So just wanted to congratulate him and thank everyone who was able to join us in Seattle for joining us, for attending. We had over 600 attendees. It was our second kind of in-person event. We had the one in December, but this is our first annual convention partnered with Ameren since 2019. So really happy to see everyone. We had some great events. We had golf. We had a community service project. We did a lot of work with Chief Seattle Club. Actually raised $2,000 for Chief Seattle Club through some of the raffles we did on site. So it was a great convention in Seattle. Really appreciate everyone turning out. And then the last slide here is just where we're going next. And our next event is our legislative conference. This is one we typically do in the spring in DC, but we did postpone it this year because of some COVID issues at the time. But now it's been rescheduled for September. So September 19th, 20th, and 21, be on the lookout for registration, but we do hope you can join us here in DC, get some face-to-face time with our members of Congress, with the federal officials here in DC, with the NAIHC staff here at the headquarters office. We are typical hotel. Again, we're at the same place we've usually been at the last few years, just down the street from our office and just right off the hill. So I really encourage folks to attend this conference. I know September is a tougher one because it's a lot of your projects, construction season, things like that. People get busy in the summer months. So unfortunately, we just had to, with kind of the availability we had to postpone the one in the spring. We needed to work with the hotel on having new dates. So the September is still very timely for congressional calendars, for advocacy work. As we wind down this year, this is the last couple months to get everything passed right before it has to start again. So this will be a good final push, a good final call to our legislators, our members of Congress, and to hear from all of you and for you to hear from them. So it's still a timely conference and we're excited about it and excited to hold this one in person again in DC. So be on the lookout for that registration. With that, I'm going to open it up. We've only got a few minutes left, but is there any other questions out there? I know a lot of the questions center around Treasury and the portal and the issues there. Like I said, we'll try to get as much information to you as we can in the next day or two about that, and the next couple of weeks as we get closer to the final reporting deadlines that we see. But we do hope we'll work with Treasury to get some of those things resolved. But I encourage you all to keep trying and certainly document what you're submitting. So you don't necessarily have to go do it all again. If you can maybe capture screens and screen grabs or what have you and submit that to Treasury as well. Unfortunately, I'd be outside the portal, and I suspect they'll try again, but definitely want to make sure you're documenting what you're submitting so you're not having to start from scratch each time in case things get unsaved or erased out of the portal. I know there's a lot of frustration out there about that, but we'll try to update folks as we hear anything about that and be on the lookout for notes from Treasury as well. Any other questions out there? Questions, comments, concerns? Appreciate everyone joining us. I know this is an off week for this call, so we'll return to our normal first Thursday next month. Well, thank you for spending an hour with us, whether it's your afternoon or your morning, or depending on where you are. Appreciate everyone joining us, and we'll see everyone next month. Don't hesitate to ask questions if you got. You can always email or give us a call at NAIHC in the meantime, but look forward to seeing everyone again next month as well. Have a good day, everyone.